Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 1 of my beginner series. Now, Crimson Desert's combat systems and getting to grips with the game's fundamental mechanics are absolutely essential to getting the upper hand in boss fights and progressing through the game's vast open world encounters. It's one of many systems compared to other RPG titles that allow you to be creative, have fun, and develop a sense of flow with the combat. If you've watched any gameplay footage, you probably already noticed that the fights look pretty intense and cinematic, and Crimson Desert doesn't shy away from this. We'll be jumping into how combat systems work fundamentally, with some mechanics that are easy to miss, and a few tips that can make fights much easier when you're just starting out. I'd like to share with you exactly what the game is aiming to do and just why it shines so well. So enjoy guys, I hope this will be informative for you new players out there, including veterans that are excited to try this fresh new experience. I've got a bunch of guides in the works, so if you haven't already, subscribe to stay informed with the Beginner Guide series. So let's jump into progression within combat, and something that I want to touch base on is basically the leveling progression system in Crimson Desert. Now, what's interesting is there isn't a traditional leveling style in the game, so where you clear a boss, an area of the map, and you basically level your character up, there's no level gating. So of course there are high level areas within the game, but you're not stuck at a spot where you're forced to clear it to progress. And a reason why this is so important to combat is you can do what you want, work out what style best suits your needs, and grow your toolkit instead of traditional levels. So this is really interesting, and it's essentially you as a character growing your skill sets and your abilities and everything in between on the battlefield. Yes, of course you have artifact chests, which help you grow your health and stamina, almost like the God of War system, where basically certain items will grow your stamina bar and health bar, and the more you acquire, the higher these bars respectively grow in size. But as far as leveling goes, your levels come from your gear, with the ability to modify said gear and weapons that you want to wield on your character. So from my point of view, it's a very fun system, which I'll certainly be diving into deeper as we continue on our beginner series journey. So moving on, let's touch base on the combat style and flow of the game. So the overall combat style in Crimson Desert, the game mixes action RPG mechanics with a really fluid combo system. Instead of having rigid attack patterns, you're encouraged to basically chain different moves together. So you've got light attacks for quick hits, heavy attacks that deal more damage and can break enemy balance, and then you can also mix in things like kicks, grapples, sweeps and throws, and special abilities. So when everything starts flowing together, combat certainly feels less like traditional RPG fighting and more like an action game where you're adapting to what's happening around you. So in terms of implementing your own playstyle, you can definitely do this. It's your choice and your prerogative. Each boss has their own set of abilities and unique moves, so instead of adapting to these bosses and just simply swinging the R1 button around in hopes to win, you can obviously do this, but there's a huge factor in that learning to combine abilities and thinking outside the box in this game yields far better results. Different mechanics like gliding to better positions, hitting weak points, or using different weapons in different scenarios and moulding them into a playstyle that suits you ultimately makes the game so much more fun and much more enjoyable. One of the most important mechanics to understand early on is the stagger, or the balance system. So enemies in Crimson Desert are essentially designed through reacting realistically to impact. So when you land enough hits or use heavier attacks, they start losing their balance. So once they stagger, they become vulnerable for a short period of time. This moment is basically your opportunity to deal serious damage. You can follow up with a heavy combo, a grapple move, or even throw them into the environment. So instead of just attacking randomly, you want to think of combat in Crimson Desert as building towards that stagger state or that stagger moment. Implementing different combo strings using different abilities from the skill tree linked to your character and figuring out enemy attack patterns obviously helps you work towards that stagger physics driven mechanic, so it's certainly a major factor you'd want to keep in mind. Now, another big part of the system, just like any RPG title, is movement. So your more traditional enemies and bosses often use wide sweeping attacks, leap attacks or powerful swings that can hit you in a respective arc or radius if you're directly in front of them. So of course, dodging and repositioning is an essential tool to keep in your arsenal. Now with Crimson Desert, it seems that we don't just have the traditional dodge to evade, but we have engagement tools to enter the fight. These come in various different forms like aerial dives, grapples then slamming down to the ground, and jump kicks and sweeps, and ultimately all of this is your choice, right? So if I just sat here and said you have to use this certain skill or weapon or particular combo, that would be totally wrong. The game is certainly persuading you to have fun, explore every combat system possible to get the most out of the game. Back attacks and hitting enemy weak points in certain boss scenarios in Crimson Desert are especially useful for certain enemy types, because they can interrupt enemies or deal extra damage depending on the situation. So getting a hold on your movement inputs and exploring with these mechanics and dodge timings will ultimately lead to a more fluid and fun state of combat. Now next up we need to talk about grapples, because this is one of the mechanics that really makes Crimson Desert stand out. Now when enemies are staggered or vulnerable, you can grab them and perform different types of throws or takedowns. From the gameplay, it looks like you can choke slam and suplex enemies, which look super fun, and to be honest, it's a mechanic that hasn't been shown in many previous game titles before of this nature. And of course, this isn't just for style, it actually looks extremely effective in combat. Throwing enemies into walls and the environment, or even other enemies, can deal massive damage and sometimes knock multiple opponents down at once. This becomes incredibly useful when you're fighting groups, and of course, speaking of groups, crowd control is another important skill to learn early. Running directly into a large group of enemies is obviously asking for trouble, and looking at some of the hands-on gameplay, dive mechanics, sweeping attacks seem to be fairly prominent, with the ability to disrupt groups, so using these types of moves can certainly turn the tides in group fights. On top of the offensive mechanics, we also have defensive mechanics, so let's talk about that for a moment. Blocking and parrying. So this can make a huge difference in tougher encounters. Parrying requires good timing, but if you block right as an enemy attack lands, you can stagger them and instantly create a counter-attack opportunity. It might take some practice to get the timing right, but once you get comfortable with it, fights become much easier. Now, even if you miss the perfect timing, blocking can still reduce incoming damage, which helps you stay alive during tougher battles. But ultimately, the counter-attack opportunities in this game could be absolutely massive, as if you were to open an enemy up and parry, you can go into a unique combat string, and I'm sure this will be very satisfying to pull off. On top of just our weapon attacks, combos, and defensive mechanics, another mechanic which is very much missed a lot of the time is controlling your stamina management. Many actions in this game like dodging, climbing, gliding, attacking consume your stamina, and it seems pretty prominent in the fact that a lot of these extensive combos and various attack chains will tear through that stamina gauge pretty quickly. So my suggestion would be to invest some stamina points into the skill tree early on, if you can do so, just so your combo potential will feel decent instead of limiting. It's important not to obviously spam attacks too often if you can help. Try using shorter combos and then repositioning before continuing the fight. Just for an example, a simple beginner combo might look like this. So you start off with a few light attacks, follow up with a heavy strike to stagger the enemy, and then use a grapple or throw if they're vulnerable. After that you can do what you want, maybe reposition and prepare for another opening or combat string. So using shorter combos in predicted succession keeps you safe while still dealing solid damage. Another small detail that makes a big difference is paying attention to enemy animation, so most enemies telegraph their attacks with clear movements before they strike. Learning these patterns helps you know when to dodge, when to block, and when to counter, so this will ultimately lead to better stamina management. Once you start recognising those attack patterns, combat becomes much more predictable and easier to control. And when you combine all of these elements together, the combat system really starts to shine. Fights become faster, more fluid, and honestly just a lot more fun. So there you have it everyone, that's the beginner fundamental look at the combat mechanics in Crimson Desert Episode 1. In future episodes to come I'll be diving deep into mounted combat and how to unlock each mount, as well as elemental buffs and how you can apply them to your weapon. Hopefully this video was informative and gives you a few ideas or philosophies for improving your gameplay. Of course, if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful in any way, shape or form, please make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more Crimson Desert guides, tips and gameplay. If you've got an idea or guide that you'd like to see in the next episode, drop us a comment down below. Every comment is read and replied to, so feel free to give me some feedback. If you'd like me to go much more in depth with the combat systems in a future video, don't be afraid to let me know. As always everyone, thank you so much for watching along, take care, and I'll catch you in the next Crimson Desert video. Bye for now.